Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 1220 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today on Defining Diabetes, Jenny Smith and I are going to define tug of war. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. When you place your first order for AG1 with my link, you'll get 5 free travel packs and a free year's supply of vitamin D. Drink ag1.com/juicebox. If you have type 1 diabetes or are the caregiver of someone with type 1 and a U.S. resident, please go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox and complete the survey. Your answers will help to move type 1 diabetes research forward, and it may help you too. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. If you're living with diabetes or are the caregiver of someone who is, and you're looking for an online community of supportive people who understand, check out the Juicebox Podcast private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast Type 1 Diabetes. There are now 50,000 members who are sharing stories and ideas. Go check out this amazing private and free Facebook group. Today's episode is sponsored by Medtronic Diabetes, a company that's bringing together people who are redefining what it means to live with diabetes. Later in this episode, I'll be speaking with Mark. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 28. He's 47 now. Then at the very end of the episode, you can hear my entire mini interview with Mark. To hear more stories from the Medtronic Champion community or to share your own story, visit medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox and check out the Medtronic Champion hashtag on social media. All right, one last one.
Yay.
Jenny, I'm going to ask you to help me define something that I made up. So,
Okay.
but you're uniquely qualified for this, and I'll tell you why.
Oh, fabulous.
A number of years ago, you've said a number of kind things to me over the years, but a number of years ago, you told me that my explanation about how meal insulin works was the clearest that you had heard, and that you were telling it to other people, which very much touched me.
Oh.
When I describe a tug of war between the insulin and the carbs.
Yes.
So apparently I've said that, enough times in the podcast that now people are like, hey, what is this tug of war thing? If they haven't actually heard the explanation. So we're going to define tug of war.
Yay.
As it pertains to meal insulin. Let me give you a tiny bit of back. I haven't done this in a while. Do you know that I used to stand in this room by myself and give this explanation out loud until I got to the point where I could just do it, because I was giving so many talks that I didn't want to get confused while I was doing it. Anyway, I've practiced this, so I feel stupid.
So you're ready. You're ready to go.
No, it makes me feel stupid to say it in front of you. But because I've stood up and gone through it so many times. But
would you like me to turn my camera off?
Could you look away, please?
I can look at your chameleon.
So, but that'll sound like a non sequitur to anyone who doesn't know there's a chameleon behind me.
Sorry.
Okay. So in the beginning, before I had a podcast, I had it in my head that using insulin at meals was like the scales of justice, but that both had little holes in each side. And I used to try to tell people, imagine that there's a dish on one side of the scale and a dish on the other side, and you're adding insulin and carbs in it in a way that as they're dripping out the bottom and losing their ability to impact the scale, you just add a little more of this and a little bit of that just to keep it balanced. I've probably told this story somewhere else, so I'll just skip through it very quickly. I was trying to explain that to someone one day, and they said, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And I was in a position where if I didn't help this person, a very young, confused mom was going to go back to a very young baby with diabetes and not understand how to help the baby.
Not a good scenario.
It was in a private conversation. I felt heartbroken. I didn't want to leave her off the call that we were on together. And so I just recentered myself, and I have no idea where this came from, but I said, have you ever been involved in a tug of war, like on a schoolyard? And she said, yes. And I was like, okay, great. I said, well, instead of one team on one side and one team on the other side, I want you to think about insulin on one side of the rope, and carbs on the other side of the rope. And in the middle, of course, there's this flag hanging. And in your tug of war at school, it was your goal to yank the flag onto your side. I said, but in our tug of war, the goal is that the flag never moves. It just stays in the center. And no matter how hard the carbs pull or how hard the insulin pulls, we can't get that flag to go up and down. And I said, now, right now, we're thinking east to west, but I want you to flip that whole image in your head to north and south. So instead of the carbs pulling west, let's think of the carbs pulling north, and let's think of the insulin pulling south. And we still don't want that flag to move. I said, now imagine every minute that goes by, a new flag pops up in this timeline. And the longer we keep that flag in the middle, that's a straight line on a CGM. And she said, I'm following. And I was like, oh, good, because I was nervous. I was literally making it up as I was going along, right? And I said to her, I'm like, so just try to imagine this. You know how when you eat food, your blood sugar starts to go up pretty quickly. In the first couple of minutes, you can see it on the CGM. But when you bolus for insulin, it doesn't. Like the insulin goes in and it just, sometimes can sit there for 15, 20 minutes, depending on the situation and where your blood sugar is at the time. Could go longer and longer before you see an impact in the pulling down from the insulin. So what I want you to do is I want you to cheat a little. I want you to tell the insulin it's allowed to pull first. And then right when the insulin's kind of picking up steam and that flag is starting to move off center towards the insulin, so let's go ahead and eat, right? So now you'll eat, and a few minutes later, just as that flag is really starting to move towards the insulin side or, down, the food kicks in and starts to pull up. And I was like, and now we're in a tug of war. And if we've timed that insulin correctly and used enough, and if your basal's right and all the other things, neither side is going to win that tug of war. And the flag is going to stay right in the middle, minute after minute, off into the future. And you're going to have a nice, stable line. And that's doable when you're eating anything. Like, it's not easy, but it's doable. That's it. That's what I said to her. And she was like, okay, I'm good. And she was on her way. What about that did you like when you heard it?
I just like that there was something that was easy to put in the mind, the ease of a tug of war game, knowing what the pull is, and the fact of a difference in a real tug of war game. You want one side to win, right? We want insulin to win, but we also want the food to win, right?
Yeah.
So your explanation also goes along with a CGM line, which allows us to see that flag, just little bits of movement as each side gets their pull in, but overall keeps it fairly nice and stable. You might have a little bit of a rise. The insulin really gets moving because you timed it well and it smooths it out on the back end. It's just a really easy mental kind of picture to paint for people who are much more, I think, visual learners in a way.
Okay.
It just, it was just a really nice, description.
You'll hear me talk about it like football with like blockers. And there's times when I think about it in my head, like the point in time on the CGM line, like the dot, is almost like a drunk running between two lines of people with pillows. And as they wobble back and forth, the people with the pillows reach out and shove them back to the center again. And I don't know another way to say that when I'm watching Arden's graph and I see it rising, in my mind, I imagine the insulin on top of it trying to push it back down again. And the same way as treating a low, when I see that going down and the carbs go in my mind, I'm like, okay, the carbs are underneath there like a floor jack now, trying to lift it back up again. And it helps me a lot when I'm considering the insulin to picture it that way, because the math of it doesn't help me in that moment. Like, I'm not comforted by we use the right amount, or I know her carb ratio is good, like that kind of stuff. Like, I look at that graph and I imagine what's happening: carbs, fat, digestion, insulin, basal specifically. And I find the addendum to this story, now that algorithms exist and you can see basal getting like ramped up,
Yes.
right? It almost feels like we can't protect the quarterback with our 5 offensive linemen, so I've kept the tight end to block, which is a very specific idea if you don't understand football. But like, here's more. Like, hey, this rise is happening. I know your basal of 1 unit an hour usually handles this, but the algorithm says it's not working. Here's 1.3 units for the next 10 minutes or something like that. I'm gonna leave the tight end back to block a little longer.
Yep.
And those little like pictograms are a big part of how I taught myself to understand the algorithm and graphs on a CGM. So
I think it goes along with, and we use bump and nudge, which are also terms that you brought in. We use them kind of opposite. Mine is opposite of what, because you say what for bump? What does bump do?
To me, bump brings you up
Mm-hmm.
and nudge brings you down. And you think of nudge as nudging up, you nudge with carbs and you bump with insulin.
Correct.
And I bump with carbs and I nudge with insulin. But it doesn't matter as long as...
It doesn't matter as long as you understand which is which for you.
As long as you understand which is what... Yeah, don't start randomly going bump and meaning one thing and everything. But yeah, even that, like it's still that... You've heard me say before, and this gets a little bit away from tug of war, but at the same time, I think it helps add to the idea.
Mm-hmm.
When you learn to drive, one of the hardest things in the beginning is to learn not to overcorrect, right? Like you don't want to, like you see that yellow line, you're like, oh my God. And then the next thing you know, you're across the yellow line and you're, out into the weeds, or you're crossed into the other lane. I think that when I stopped and thought about when you're drifting off the road, the amount you turn the steering wheel to bring yourself back is almost imperceivable to your eye. You're barely moving it.
Right.
And that's how I kind of think about the insulin in non-emergent situations. Like, I'm not saying if you're 60 straight down, you should have 2 gummy bears and see what happens. But because what's going to happen is you're going to wake up with the EMTs there and gummy bears in your mouth.
Yeah.
But if you're drifting at the end of a bolus, and it's 5 hours in and you see an 80 become a 78, become a 76. I'm like, I wonder what a gummy bear would do right here. I wonder what 2 Skittles might accomplish. Like, can I just bump this back up a little bit?
Yes.
And then the same, and I know we've talked about it so many times, but it really does fit here. The same thing with a slowly drifting up blood sugar. My 95 has become 105, has become this. Like, instead of staring at it for the next 3 hours until it's 180 and bolusing, like, see what 0.1 does. You know what I mean? Like, what would a temp basal for 15 minutes accomplish here? Like, that kind of stuff.
I think that's maybe why we consider it. Like, I've always been conservative with nudging. Mm-hmm. I've always been and nudge and bump in terms of me. A nudge is a little light, gentle. And a bump is a little bit more of a aggressive, right?
Oh,
so my nudge to my blood sugar is if I'm lower, I've always been really conservative with what I use to treat. Mm-hmm. And so I consider that more of like a little gentle, like I might need 1 or 2 grams of carb. Oh. It's a little nudge. Whereas if my blood sugar is going up or it is high for some reason, I consider that like, let's bump this thing, man. Let's get this moving.
So you use the words as strength and I use them as direction.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
I use that because I've always, like I said, bump and nudge are a little nudge is like, it's more like friendly. Whereas a bump is like, man, get out of my way. Like, woo.
I gotcha. I understand. So, okay. No, this is wonderful.
There you go.
I love this conversation.
See, I am a visual learner. That's how I think of things too, which I think is the reason that I really liked your example of the tug of war.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, I probably had thought about it almost like that, but I didn't really define it.
Put words to it. I literally speak in pictures sometimes. I know my wife, whose brain does not work like that. You should see her and I try to tell each other how to get to somewhere in our car. It's fascinating. I lay it out and she goes, I don't know what you're talking about. and then she tells me and I'm like, I can't follow what you're saying.
Yeah. It
really is fascinating. Yeah. So tug of war to me is, you're going to be inclined to think of it as a meal bolus, but I apply it to everything. I apply it to basal. I apply it to meal boluses, corrections. Anytime you're using insulin, there is a tug of war at play. Mm-hmm. That's it. Okay. Thank you.
Nice.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely. That was good.
All right. So I think because we only have a couple of minutes left.
Are you the direction giver like I am? That's like the red house 3 blocks from here, take a right. And then when you get a little further where there's the gas station that used to be, but now it's all burned down, now you take a left. Those are my directions. My husband's the one who taught me to read a map.
Really?
Yes. And even still, when I do maps, I still expand it. And I'm like, is there like a McDonald's or something? Like, what should I look at?
Where's
Not
the
just
arches?
road signs. Where are the arches? Or where is the gas station? Like, where is it on the map? So I can see that where I'm turning. Oh, yes, this is an identifiable building. And that's how I know where I'm going.
Yeah, I don't know directions at all. Like, if I'm driving south or north, I have no idea. Like, it's not important to me. Like, and I don't know. Like, I'm like, drive for a couple of minutes and then make a left here. And she's very just specific about it. Like
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Although I don't know if it matters now. My son's 24. He doesn't almost drive anywhere without his nav on.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm like, do you know where you're at? And he's like, the thing knows. And I'm like, okay. Arden's completely different. Arden will get in a car at like 7 at night. She'll be like, I'm going to go drive around. And then she'll come home at like 11 and she'll be like, there's a house. And she'll like have dug deep into the town and found a place and been very like learning the landscape of it. I don't think Cole would go for a ride for fun ever. It's interesting how they think about it differently. Yeah. I can't even tell you how I give directions because obviously I'm just doing it the right way.
Yes. I give directions just like I told you.
Yeah.
I tell people what to look for, what's there, the big red tree that's got half of it missing. Those are my directions.
That's viable. Yeah. What if I don't see the tree though, Jenny?
Then you were not using your eyeballs and listening.
Should have been paying attention. And now you're in Minnesota. I think we're kind of done for today, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm just going to leave you and go. A diabetes diagnosis comes with a lot of new terms, and you're not going to understand most of them. That's why we made Defining Diabetes. Go to juiceboxpodcast.com, up into the menu, and click on Defining Diabetes to find the series that will tell you what all of those words mean. Short, fun, and informative, that's Defining Diabetes. The Diabetes Variables series from the Juicebox Podcast goes over all the little things that affect your diabetes that you might not think about. From travel and exercise to hydration and even trampolines. Juiceboxpodcast.com. Go up in the menu and click on Diabetes Variables. And now my full conversation with Medtronic champion, Mark. Mark, how old were you when you were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes?
I was 28.
28. How old are you now?
47.
47. So just about 20 years?
Yeah, 19 years.
What was your management style when you were diagnosed?
I used injections for about 6 months, and then my endocrinologist in the Navy recommended a pump.
How long had you been in the Navy?
Let's see, 8 years up to that point.
8 years.
Yeah.
I've interviewed a number of people who have been diagnosed during service, and most of the time they're discharged. What happened to you?
I was medically discharged. Yeah, 6 months after my diagnosis.
I don't understand the whole system. Is that like honorable?
Yeah. I mean, essentially, if you get a medical discharge, you get a commensurate honorable discharge. I guess there could be cases where something other than that, but that's really how it happens. So it's an honorable discharge but because of medical reasons.
And that still gives you access to the VA for the rest of your life, right?
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Do you use the VA for your management?
I used to up until a few years ago when we moved to North Carolina. It just became untenable.
Mm-hmm.
Just the rigmarole and process to kind of get all the things I needed, for diabetes management. It was far easier just to go through a private practice.
Was it your goal to stay in the Navy for your whole life, your career?
It was. Yeah. In fact, I think a few months before my diagnosis, my wife and I had that discussion about, staying in for the long term. And, we'd made the decision despite all the hardships and time away from home. That was what we loved the most. So that's what made it that much more difficult.
Was the Navy a lifetime goal of yours or something you came to as an adult?
Lifetime goal. I mean, as my earliest childhood memories were flying, being a fighter pilot, and specifically being flying on and off aircraft carriers. So, watching Top Gun in the 80s certainly was a catalyst for that.
You've taken off and landed a jet on an aircraft carrier?
Hundreds of times.
Is there anything in life as exhilarating as that?
No, but there's a roller coaster I rode at I think it's Cedar Rapids up in Cleveland, Sandusky, and they've got this roller coaster that takes you from 0 to I think it's like 80 or something. You go up a big hill and you come right back down. So the acceleration is pretty similar, I would say, to a catapult shot.
I'm going to guess you own a Tesla.
I don't.
Oh, okay.
I'm a boring guy. I got a hybrid RAV4. I get made fun of. I get called, my wife says I drive like a grandpa. I'm a 5 miles per hour over the speed limit person. No more than that. So yeah, in the car, I'm boring, Scott.
So you've never felt a need to try to replace that with something else?
You can't replace it. It's irreplaceable.
That's what I thought.
So up until the point where someone, buys me an F-18 or allows me to get inside a 2-seater and fly it, you can't replace it.
How did it make you feel when you saw, or maybe you haven't seen, a gentleman named Pietro has his large aircraft license. He's flying for a major carrier now. He has type 1 diabetes. Does that feel hopeful to you?
Yeah, it does. When I was diagnosed, that wasn't a possibility. The FAA prohibited commercial pilots who had type 1 diabetes. But I think it was 2017 when they changed their rules to allow type 1 diabetics to be commercial pilots. And part of the reason they did that was because of the technology advancements, specifically in pump therapy and pump management. So I don't have any aspirations of going to the commercial airlines, but one of my sons who has type 1 diabetes very much wants to be a commercial pilot. So, in that respect, I'm very hopeful and thankful.
Yeah. Do you fly privately now for pleasure?
I do. Yeah. One of my favorite things to do is fly my kids to the different soccer tournaments I have all over the Southeast U.S. So last week, my wife and I and 2 of our boys flew up to Richmond for their soccer tournaments up there. And Charlie, who's my middle child, has type 1 diabetes. So, if I can combine flying, family, and football in one weekend, to me, I think I've just achieved Valhalla.
So then it sounds to me like this diagnosis was a significant course correction for you. Can you tell me how it affected your dream?
Well, I guess 3 words come to mind. First, it was devastating. Everything I had done in life, everything I'd worked up to that point was just taken away in an instant. And I was not prepared for that at all. The second emotion it was scary. I hadn't thought much about life outside the Navy, certainly not life as anything else but a fighter pilot. And Heather and I were getting ready to move to France. I was going to do an exchange tour with the French Naval Air Force. So we were taking French classes. So pretty quickly, I had to reinvent myself. And then probably the most important thing at the same time that all that was going on, I had to learn how to deal with type 1 diabetes and how to manage it effectively. The third thing that pops into my mind, I guess, is challenging. New daily routines I had to establish, first with injections and then eventually, through pump management. And then learning how to count carbs and recognize highs and lows, how my body reacts to blood sugar trends based on exercise and stress and those types of things. And my goal at that time, and it still is today, is to leverage technology and make sure my habit patterns are effective so that I take diabetes management from the forefront to the background.
Have you had success with that? Do you feel like you've made the transition well?
I have. I believe in continuous improvement, so there's always more to do. I will say the technology, since I was diagnosed, specifically with pump management, it's just incredible. It takes less of me intervening, and it's really done by the pump itself and by the algorithms through the CGMs. And to me, again, that should be the goal for everybody, is to not have to focus so much on the daily aspects of type 1 diabetes management. We should let technology do that for us.
What else have you found valuable? I've spoken to thousands of people with type 1 diabetes. The one thing that took me by surprise, because I don't have type 1 myself and my daughter was very young when she was diagnosed, I didn't really understand until I launched this podcast, and then it grew into this kind of big Facebook presence. I heard people say, I don't know anybody else who has type 1 diabetes. I wish I knew more people. But until I saw them come together, I didn't recognize how important it was.
Yeah, I think similarly, I didn't know anyone with type 1 diabetes growing up as an adult up until when I was diagnosed. And then all of a sudden, people just came out of the woodwork. And when CGMs first hit the market, certainly within the last 5 years, it's amazing to me and my family how many people we've noticed with type 1 diabetes simply because you can see the CGM on their arm. I would say a month does not go by where we don't run into someone at a restaurant or an amusement park or a sporting event or somewhere where we see somebody else with type 1 diabetes. And the other surprising aspect of that is just how quickly you make friends. And I'll give an example. We were at a soccer tournament up in Raleigh this past Saturday and Sunday, and the referee came over to my son Charlie at the end of the game and said, "Hey, I noticed you were wearing a pump." And he lifted up his shirt and showed his pump as well and said, "I've had type 1 diabetes since I was 9 years old. I played soccer in college. I'm sure that's your aspiration. And I just want to tell you, don't let type 1 diabetes ever stop you from achieving your dreams of what you want to do." And this gentleman was probably in his late 50s or 60s. So just having that connection and seeing the outreach and people's willingness to share their experiences, it just means the world to us and just makes us feel like we're part of a strong community.
Yeah. So would you say that the most important things are strong technology, tools, understanding how to manage yourself, and a connection to others?
Yeah, technology for sure, and knowing how to leverage it. And then the community, and that community is your friends, your family, caregivers, for me, the Medtronic Champions community, all those resources that are out there to, help guide the way, but then help you keep abreast on, the new things that are coming down the pike.
Yeah.
And to give you hope for eventually, that we can find a cure.
You mentioned that your son wanted to be a pilot. He also has type 1 diabetes. How old was he when he was diagnosed?
So Henry was diagnosed when he was 12 years old. It was just at the start of COVID. We were actually visiting my in-laws in Tennessee. We woke up in the morning and he had wet his bed. And several years before that, we had all 4 of our boys tested for TrialNet. So, predictor of whether or not they were going to develop type 1 diabetes. And Henry and one of his brothers tested positive for a lot of the indicators. So we always kind of had an inclination that there was a high degree of possibility he would develop it, but we always had it in the back of our mind as well. And so when that event happened at the beginning of COVID, we had him take his blood sugar on my glucometer, and it was over 400. And so right away, we knew that without even being diagnosed properly by an endocrinologist, that he was a type 1 diabetic. So we hurried home to get him properly diagnosed in Charlottesville. And then we just started the process, first grieving, but then acceptance and, his eventual becoming part of the team that nobody wants to join.
How old is he now?
Yeah, he's 15 years old now.
When's the first time he came to you and said, "Is this going to stop me from flying?"
Almost immediately. So like me, he always had aspirations of flying. In fact, he, out of all 4 boys, wanted to be in the military. And that was a difficult part of the conversation and maybe something that we don't talk about as a community. But there are some things you cannot do as a type 1 diabetic. And that's a hard fact of life. And unfortunately, joining the military is one of those hard and fast things. You cannot join the military as a type 1 diabetic. So that was very difficult for him and for me and my wife to get over. Then we also started talking about being a commercial pilot. And so I saw that same excitement in his eyes because like me, he can be in an F-18 or a 737 or a Cirrus SR-20 that I fly and be just as happy. Yeah. So he still has that passion today and still very much plans to eventually become a commercial pilot.
I appreciate you sharing that with me. Thank you. You have 4 children. Do any others have type 1?
They do. My oldest twin, Henry, has type 1 diabetes, and my middle son, Charlie, has type 1 diabetes as well.
The boys are twins.
The oldest 2 are twins. One has type 1 diabetes. My middle son, who is not a twin, has type 1 diabetes.
I see. Is there any other autoimmune in your family?
There isn't. I'm really the only person in my family or my wife's family that we know of with any sort of autoimmune disease, certainly type 1 diabetes. So unfortunately, I was the first to strike it rich and unfortunately pass it along to 2 of my sons.
But celiac, thyroid, anything like that?
Nothing. We're really a pretty healthy family. So this came out of nowhere for myself and for my 2 sons.
That's really something. I appreciate your time very much, and I appreciate you sharing this with me. Thank you very much.
Anytime, Scott.
Learn more about the Medtronic Champion community at medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox or by searching the hashtag Medtronic Champion on your favorite social media platform. If you're not already subscribed or following in your favorite audio app, please take the time now to do that. It really helps the show. And get those automatic downloads set up so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. The episode you just heard was professionally edited by Wrong Way Recording. WrongWayRecording.com.